Colleagues, now we move into a session to explore UQ's Indigenising the Curriculum Teaching and Learning Guide. It's a soft launch of the guide, and I'd like to sort of echo everything that Tracy has said about the need for this guide, but also the notion that it's a continuing part of the conversation. It's built upon decades of Professor Bunda's scholarship and many others, some of whom are here today. I want to make particular mention, colleague Louise, your leadership and your intellect here. You've been absolutely a driving force, and it is just so exceptional. I'm so pleased to be a small part of it, Louise. Guide's not finished, but it's ready to be. The work of this guide continues, and it provides a foundation for other work to collect data, to reflect, and to finesse our approaches. We're so thrilled to point for far too long as a community and a sector saying and hearing from teachers that they want to start, but they don't know how. So this guide, along with so many other resources and people and networks such as UQ Has a Black History and our Indigenising the Curriculum Handbook, means that we have a critical mass for people to redouble their efforts. This is the truest example of an innovation I can think of. So I'll stop talking now. I'll pass over to my colleague Louise to lead us through an overview of the guide. Thank you, Louise.
Hello. So my name's been mentioned a few times. I'm Louise Ferris. I'm from Italy as an Indigenous learning designer, purely working on Indigenising curriculum. So that's who I am when people say Louise, Louise, Louise. So I'm just going to keep it really brief today because we're caught on time. But with the guide, it's currently sitting at a CAP editorial group being launched in 2026 with some complementary changes in JAC. So that is all to come. We'll be in touch. There'll be some more comms to come with when that is actually happening. I wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse into potentially what is in the guide. Currently, this is just a little bit from our contents page. We have a part A and a part B. Within the part A, we go through the background and underpinning principles. We go through trying to really lens this out as a programmatic approach. And then we have the explanation and a lot of the work that was already the groundwork of the green paper / white paper that Professor Tracy had already been put forward, but we've refreshed this, put that through the guide as well. And then the big change that I think is the main purpose of the guide is this understanding the ways of Indigenising practice. And we've got 4 E's. They're engaging, establishing, extending and embodying. So it goes through a little bit of an explanation of that. And we have some discipline-specific learning outcomes and assessments. However, it's a guide for the whole university, so we've had to try and keep this as brief as we can, and try and complement everything that's happening at this university level. Part B is kind of some guidance. It is a guide. It's just some recommendations that we're putting forward that can be, obviously it's all up to schools and faculties on how they adopt this and take their own lens on how they do this in their schools and faculties. But we go through a little bit of the governance, some strategic recommendations and support and resources in there as well, just trying to summarise. So this is just, this is sort of like the 4 levels that we have. They complement the design principles that are in the green and white paper. And there is going to be changes coming in JAC, and that will be giving course coordinators a little bit of opportunity to work out engaging with these different levels and describing what kind of associated assessment is potentially attached, if so. So this is just another little snippet. This just kind of goes through a little summary of what those levels are looking like. And I'm going to probably wrap it up at that. I probably won't have time for questions because we're trying to catch up. So thank you, but that's all to come. There'll be more comms coming. We'll see what happens. So right now we've got a little bit of a break and got time to have a little bit of a networking session. We do have morning tea over in the far corner. I will keep in mind that we do have a presentation next. So if we can try and just listen out for me to wrap you all back in. But if you are making your way down there, just be nice in this time. There's lots of people in the room. I know there's people online. But if we could just try and introduce someone new, have a little conversation about, what is something that you're trying to implement for next year. But I'll keep it on tabs. We don't know how long we're going to go for morning tea. So jump up, have a cup of tea, celebrate Professor Tracy, and we'll see you again shortly. Thank you. Okay, so we're just about to start the Indigenising Curriculum Showcase, and our first presentation is by Professor Tracy Bundy and Associate Professor Caitlin Barney, and this is in regards to their Teaching and Innovation grant.
What do you want, Caitlin? Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, so Caitlin and I worked with a number of schools within science around this particular project. And what we wanted to focus on is the absences within the curriculum, knowing full well that there would be people who were at that stage of wanting to do something but not quite sure how to actually go about that. We wanted to be able to use the opportunity of the project to be able to record student and staff's experiences of Indigenising curriculum. Certainly there were people, teaching staff within the science faculty who had some experience and were feeling very confident. I would name those people without shaming you, but Steve and Cohen, very confident about working in that space and had been doing that for a long time, compared to people who were just commencing and not really quite sure what to do.
And yeah, there were 6 courses that were part of this project. Number of people are in the room who were part of this. One is a musicology course, a biomedical science, a geography, a veterinary science course, a general science and an engineering course. So there were 6 undergraduate courses where we worked with the team to embed some new Indigenised curriculum. So they're the 6 courses, all undergraduate, either first year or second year courses across those 6 different disciplinary areas. And of course had varying numbers of students in the courses as well.
Music looks like an outlier there, but that was incorporated into the group of courses that we were working with. All right, this is our project team. We drew on Indigenous expertise as well as non-Indigenous expertise there. So, we have Bronwyn involved, we have Lavon, who's academic member of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies Unit, plus the course coordinators.
Yeah, a really big group of people that we worked with across those different disciplinary areas. We were also really lucky to work with 2 other additional Indigenous staff, Dr. Alana Hunt, who's with us here today, and Emily McConaughey. So really lucky to have both of them working on the project as well. And we also worked with an Indigenous reference group as part of the project, and an evaluator, Professor Maria Rosidi at the University of the Sunshine Coast, to have evaluation and feedback throughout the project.
Some people would know Carol, if we go back to that last one, some people would know Carol as Indigenous academic within architecture, Cam Raw, University of Melbourne, Delene, Caitlin's worked with Delene.
Yallinji
is,
musician.
yeah.
And Columbia.
Thelma as the Associate Dean Indigenous within medicine and health.
So it's been an 18-month project that we started mid-year last year, and we had the first reference group meeting, and then we had a number of collaborative team workshops with the team, and also smaller group meetings with individual team members. Then in first semester this year, the different activities were piloted in the different courses, and we also applied for ethical clearance at that time to do some interviews with students and staff. Then mid-year this year, we did this interviews as well as held a symposium on the project. A number of people who are here were involved in that. And then we're in the final stage of the project at the moment, which is developing some case studies and strategies from the project. We won't talk too much today about what was implemented. I'll give a couple of examples. In the courses, all different things were done in the 6 different courses depending on the context. Nearly all of those courses developed new learning objectives. So for example, in the music course with Dennis Collins, he had a new learning objective that was embedded, as well as a new teaching and learning module linked with assessment, where it was a reading task and students had to look at an Indigenous perspective on and a non-Indigenous perspective on using the archive. So that was what was implemented in his course. Another example is in Angela Dean's geography course. A new learning objective was embedded, as well as 2 new classes, one around a multi-dimensional concept of country and Indigenous perspectives on that, as well as another class on Indigenous land management. And we interviewed Angela as part of the podcast we do on Indigenising curriculum and practice as well. A number of people who are involved in other courses are here today, who could speak later if you wanted to talk to them about what was implemented. But we thought we'd just focus very briefly now on what staff said during interviews around what was the benefits of doing this project together and some of the ongoing challenges. So we interviewed 9 of the staff who are involved in the TIG.
I just wanted to say
Can you go back?
something. If we go back, those first 3 dot points, you know, the thread then goes to the graduate attribute as well. So just to be mindful of that. All right, I'll give you a moment to read that. And I spoke to some of this within the opening address about people being really quite fearful of stepping into the space and making mistakes. Many a conversation with my colleague Kate O'Brien over in engineering and IT, architecture and IT, talk about this crazy concept of positionality, which would be a new concept for people sitting in that engineering science spaces. But the positionality is exactly what I was talking about within the opening address. What's my location in reference to Indigenous knowledges, Indigenous histories, you know, and I think it's in that moment of deeply thinking about that people realise the absence that they have in terms of their own education around Indigenous matters. So, you know, the climb to get to that level of feeling confident is quite long, and people may feel a struggle in being able to get to that space of confidence. And that's why we're building, you know, all of that support infrastructure so that people can get to that space. And I just want to reiterate, at no time at no time have I ever said that this Indigenised curriculum should be across all courses. It should be compulsory. You know, that is the decision of faculty and schools and course coordinators, ADAs, teaching and learning directors. That's your conversation to have to where best locate an Indigenised curriculum. And it's also the space where staff can put their hand up and say, I'm going to have a crack. All right, I'll let you read that. When we had the workshops, it's really quite surprising, you know, for Caitlin and I, just how much work it was being done across those 7 courses, and to know that people were willing to commit and were on the right track. And that's why it's important to have those faculty committees or advisory groups, you know, to be able to be present, to be able to support the work.
And I think that was a real strength of the project, was the cross-disciplinary collaboration that occurred in the project. That was something people talked about, that opportunity to meet with people across diverse disciplines, the workshops, the importance of having an Indigenous reference group as part of the project was a way of building people's confidence and empowering them to be able to work collaboratively in the space, and, you know, getting that opportunity to listen and learn from a diverse range of people.
I think that confidence with the knowledge that you're going to actually implement is then really critical, because you're the one who's going to transfer that knowledge to the students, so the students can see the sense in it. And again, that's why it's important for the university to think about, where am I located in regards to, and my discipline in regards to, Indigenous histories, matters, people, societies, you know. And because what we don't want to do, we don't want to perpetuate new forms of colonisation, new forms of knowledge imperialism, you know. I mean, is that the type of graduate that we want to come out of UQ in relation to Indigenous matters within this country? You know, we want to be able to be in a place to build through our knowledge transfer, you know, a more cohesive society. And you only need to look at, you know, Closing the Gap report to know that we've still got a long way to go. But as an institution, you know, universities are responsible for knowledge production, and they have relied so heavily on only one form of knowledge for such a long time. I think that needs to change. People need to get brave. People need to get courage. Maybe I should have put that down as a principle.
And this was an ongoing challenge that people talk about, that they can feel that it's an add-on rather than deeply embedded in the course. I really like this quote about it feeling like a bit of a splinter in the side of the course. And I think that is an ongoing challenge for embedding in courses as well. This was another theme that staff talked about, their perception that students might not see the relevance of why Indigenous perspectives were being included in a course. And you can see from that second quote of, you know, their perception that students were thinking, why should we do this? We want to talk about the course topic, rather than, you know, embedding Indigenous perspectives and why is this important. So I think that's another ongoing challenge, is ensuring students understand why it's important. And staff did try to do that by, again, signalling to the graduate attribute and talking about why being a culturally capable graduate is an important part of that and why it's important, and also the Reconciliation Action Plan.
And I think it's a basic pedagogical challenge as well, you know, for all of us, you know, to be able to make that connection in terms of learning for for the students that we teach. I mean, I've never been, she says as she walks out the door, I've never been one to teach the same stuff over and over and over and over again. You know, for sure there's some principles, but in terms of that pedagogy, I wanted to be able to, you know, do something different, you know, to save my own sanity as well. And the question of sustainability is really important as well. I think, you know, from this work, what we can say is that, you know, people need to be able to be strengthened in their movement towards an Indigenised curriculum, have that confidence with the knowledge to be able to implement it. But I think this is a start to be able to do that. And I agree with Caitlin, you know, the interdisciplinarity. I think we talk about it, but I don't think we do it very well. But the interdisciplinarity was really beneficial. And people recognising just where they are at and the need to be able to build more.
And stepping out of your comfort zone, as
Yeah.
the quote was saying. They're all non-Indigenous staff who are coordinating these courses. But I think that collaborative nature of working closely with the reference group and the team strengthened people's experience.
And the opportunity to be able to share so people could see each other's practices. You know, I think we need to create more of those sorts of spaces. You know, we tend to be a little bit righteous about our classroom, you know. I hear you knocking, but you can't come in. But to be able to share that, and so people can then learn from that.
Okay, so where to from here? We're in that final stage of the project where we're developing some case studies based on the courses to share more broadly. And also all of those course coordinators are talking about developing new content for the coming semesters. So it's ongoing work. And we just want to thank everyone who was involved in the project. It was a really big project team. I think it was a really great project to work on, and also thank the reference group who provided really great feedback, and the evaluator, Maria Rossetti. And also I just want to acknowledge Emily McConaughey and Alana Hunt, who are in the room, who are both a joy to work with on this project.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was wonderful. We're now moving on to Dr. Abby Trott, and I'll give her a moment to get up here. We're a bit short on time, so our whole time schedule for the people that are online, there's a few presenters online, so just be in mind we're on the fly.
Oh, I'll use this one. Can everybody hear me? No, yes, yes. Hi, everybody. I've already been scribbling to cut down words, so I'll just see how I go. Oh, no, I can click. That's so good. Okay. So hi, thank you for the welcome and thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this. So I'm a teaching focused lecturer in the School of Communication and Arts, predominantly in drama, but also in digital media. And as a practitioner, I bring kind of decades of technical theatre practice with me, including quite a lot of work with First Nations theatre makers, including working for Coemba Jadara Indigenous Performing Arts Company for a number of years. Yeah, Coemba. So I've learned a lot about just giving it a go, accepting that mistakes happen, and also about my positionality. That's been very valuable, I think, through this process. I've also been a member of the Indigenising the Curriculum Community of Practice for the last 12 months, and again, have learnt a lot. So thanks everybody here for that. You've all heard me talk about this course quite a lot the last 12 months. So part of the reason that I wanted to speak to today is I went into my own process of Indigenising the curriculum in my first year drama course, not blasé, but a bit like, oh yeah, I'll just put a First Nations text in, it'll be great. But it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And I think we think that subjects that focus on a text or in the creative arts where we have easy access to text by First Nations artists, it's a lot easier, but it is more complicated. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Just want to talk a little bit about the drama program. Or should I just move on to the course? What do you think, Louise? How are we going time-wise? Okay, cool. All right, just go. Okay, so the drama course, we don't teach acting. We teach students to think critically. We aim to give them the skills to learn to understand the performance they see and the performance they want to make. So we're not teaching acting. We're teaching kind of critical thinking skills. We teach that across kind of from antiquity through to the current day and everything in between. And we do practice as well as theory. So we teach directing and we teach playwriting and we also teach historiography. In the most recent drama area review, Indigenising the curriculum was identified as a priority. And one of the implementation points was being to add a play written by an Indigenous playwright into the first year courses. Which is what I've had responsibility for. So we've got 2 first year courses, both historical survey courses, and both lay the foundations for the advanced, we should move here. There's the context, that's helpful. That's the slide I should be on. They both lay the foundations for the advanced courses and kind of the structure and the way we do things. So in terms of DRAM 1010, the elements of performance, which is the course I'm talking about today, we had 70 students, so it's a fairly small cohort, but about 30 of those on go into the advanced degree. So there's quite we being in either a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Advanced Humanities or a Bachelor of Communications, they're going to go lots of different places. But we do get people from across the whole university. We get computer science students, we get human movement studies students, we get business, economics, law students, we get science. There's a predisposition to have, we always have a maths drama student. I don't know why, but we always do. So we have a wide range of students in our program. Assessment-wise, they're graded on their participation. They have a writing activities in class. They're graded on their ability to activate a text. So take a performance like a play and activate it doing performance activities. They have a written assessment, which this semester for DRAM 1010 was a live performance review. So they had to review a performance that was part of Brisbane Festival. And then they have a critical reflection where they reflect on their performance. They have a performance assessment and then they reflect on that. So DRAM 1010 is structured around 6 elements of performance: genre, structure, time, space, body and language, which has a text associated with it, and they use that to make sense of developing a set of a series of skills around how to analyse performance and also text. So we're giving them the skills that they will use in the rest of their degree, a kind of a framework. Oh yes, not yet, not quite yet. We're going back. Sorry, no, it's right. I found the right button. So yes. So what I found is that there were 3 kind of areas that were a challenge that I worked with when I was doing this process of indigenising DRAM 1010. The first one was about choosing the text, and the second one was around kind of creating respectful spaces, and the third one was around framing. So I'm just going to talk about each of those. The text that I ended up choosing is the text that you can see here, which is Sunshine Supergirl, the Yvonne Goolagong story by Andrea James. I have some nods in the room. So yes, I'm going to start by talking about why I chose that text, because I think that leads into the next 2 points. Okay, so like I said, it's around elements. So of the 6 elements, when we were first thinking about this process, we're thinking maybe body is good, because then we can talk about the racialised body and that's really important. We also thought about language, especially around translation and the use of Aboriginal language on stage. And we were looking at, I really wanted to use Wesley Enoch and Paula Nazarski did a translation of Mother Courage and Her Children in 2014. And I really thought that would be a good, but I couldn't get the original, I couldn't get their translation. So anyway, I dilemmaed about it, because as well as all of the texts that were paired with the element were very precisely chosen, as we always do. So whatever text I picked needed to do not necessarily the same thing, but it needed to meet the needs of the course. So finding a text was more complicated than I realised. And I remember talking about this quite a few times in our groups at the community practice. So thank you for all of that help. But where I got to with my colleagues, one of my colleagues in particular, Emma Cole, was realising that time was a good element to use to frame a First Nations text. The way we use time is to kind of speak to the differences between what we call theatrical time, so what happens in the play, and real time, as in what the time that happens outside of the play. And we could use time then to comment on deep time that we often, as it's often referenced to in texts by Aboriginal and Torres Strait playwrights, but also many of the plays are biographical, not totally, but there's a tendency towards biographical texts in First Nations playwriting. And so we could use a First Nations text then to speak to how time is compressed and what's included and what's excluded. So in terms of why I picked Sunshine Supergirl, in the end, that was the play I used for my job interview. It was talking about space. Like it took me weeks. It took me a lot of thinking, but I was like, well, I spent a lot of time thinking then about this text. So I was like, well, it's a text that speaks to these kind of questions about time. It talks to deep time. It talks to compressing decades into a short amount of time. It's by a female playwright. The text I was replacing was Indecent by Paula Vogel, so it needed to be another female playwright to kind of meet the other things that I needed in the course. But also, Andrea James thinks about time really interestingly, and she uses time to comment of the central meaning of the text. So she's able to tell this story of Yvonne Goolagong in her use of time. And I realised then that actually I was just overthinking it, and really I just needed to pick a text and then give it a go and see how it happens. But I also realised it's not just about the text, it's also about the critical readings that scaffold it. And so I set critical readings by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics as well. So I set one about Telling Forgotten Stories by Lisa Marie Cyron, and one about the role of comedy in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander theatre and performance by Angelina Hurley. So I needed to, but that's also something I need to de-silo in the future. Why am I just setting my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academic critical readings about the Aboriginal text? They need to be about everything. So that's a learning for next semester and next year. And I'm not going to change the text. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep persevering. Time running out. Okay. All right. Okay. I won't talk about next semester. But yeah, so the other two things were about respectful spaces. Sorry, I have gone way over time, but I'll move quickly. Okay. So I think we all know what this is like, I think. Oh, I feel like we know what this is like. This is something that I worry about quite a lot, is about setting up safe spaces for any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in the room. And part of that is about making sure they see themselves reflected in what's being covered, but also they don't feel any pressure or obligation to be anything other than a student. So on my slides, if I would have the country of the creatives, that's important. I would also use lots of pictures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people where I can, having theatre, there's lots of plays. You would have seen there were a lot of photos of Ursula Jovic on my slides because she was in two of the plays. That was great. I can put pictures of these people up. And that's partially about decolonising the space, but it's also, yeah, it's about making sure people see themselves reflected. I also set a First Nations performance as part of the live review assessment, so they could also choose to review Preparing Ground, which was dance piece by Marilyn Miller and Jasmine Shepherd and Katina Olsen. But it was also about setting up conversations and tutorials about the complexity of non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people playing those roles. And my tutors were quite concerned about this. They were quite nervous because they felt like the student drama, well, they're all smart, but we knew that a lot of the drama students would be uncomfortable with that. So we needed to work out a way to make sure they felt comfortable with doing this and participating in this. So part of that was using the element of structure. So we used the ideas of narration as in telling offstage action, and enactment as in acting out what happened as a way of helping them navigate it. And they did a lot more talking that week than they had in other weeks. So we really got them to talk about it. And it will be different next semester because this semester they didn't have to actually choose. They didn't have any choice about what play from the curriculum they were staging, whereas next semester they can choose. So I'm using Alinta McGrady's Eat Slay Zombie as my example next semester, and they can choose to stage that, and I want them to choose to stage that, but we have to make sure they're comfortable with that. But yeah, and then the final thing, because I know how much time have I got? A couple of minutes, okay, is about framing. So this was the third bit that I got to. And this is partially about threading First Nations approaches and ways of doing things through the larger program. So it's important for us to set up the expectations about what's happening in the future and what is and isn't okay moving forward. Excuse me, part of that happens because we introduced Dr. Miriam Rose Ungumber's Bauman's idea of Dadiri, or deep listening, around developing relationships and community and reciprocity, because that's used in the third year course, which is really tightly partnered with this first year course. So we were using that as a way to get the students to look beyond what's right in front of them. I also took the opportunity to introduce Dr. Tracy Bunda and Louise Phillips' idea of storying, again, as a way of getting people to look at something beyond what's happening. So giving students the opportunity to understand one's place, oneself, and identity through an other through story. And this ties to the idea of a dramaturgical sensibility, which is something that we use a lot in the drama program to get the students to think broadly and deeply, to get them to think beyond what's happening, to think about how and why things and what connections are. Also, then the final thing is we have multiple First Nations text in one of the second year courses, Australian drama, and they've been there for a number of years. So we've got The Dreamers by Jack Davis to introduce the students to the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander theatre, and The Drover's Wife, adapted by Leah Purcell, to wrap up the course. So I needed to think about how much context to provide about that in this first year course. So I did. I could use biographical drama as theatre as a genre to look at how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander theatre happens. But anyway, the challenge is really to thread all of this stuff through the learning outcomes. They're learning outcomes that speak to cultural competency, and this has been part of our review. So how can I thread deep time and First Nations knowledge more thoroughly through the assessment? And how do I assess the students if they're doing that in a 50-minute lecture and a 110-minute tutorial? Thanks.
Do we have maybe one question at all for Dr. Abby? Or I can do it later. All right, thanks. So we're moving on to our next presentation. It is a hybrid presentation. So we have Associate Professor We're going to try calling him.
There we go.
All right, we can hear you, Terry.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted in the room. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'd like to pay my respects to the Yugurrupal people upon whose lands I'm presenting today out near Wivenhoe. So can I have the next slide, please? There we go. So the course that I teach into is the part of the MBA, and in 2024 we did a renewal of the entire program, so the timing for indigenising the curriculum was perfect. In also the course that I teach was the frameworks course, which was the introduction to the MBA program. And some of the elements of that have now been spread across the program, which meant that we could do a lot more with that course in terms of its development. And we decided, given the state of the world at the moment with ongoing climate change and authoritarian government and failures at every level, that we should be looking at a broader conception of leadership. And so the idea of resonant leadership came about. Next slide, please. So we engaged in some pretty deep thinking across all of the courses in the curriculum for the MBA program, particularly the new one, about where we could be integrating different kinds of typology. Next slide. But particularly around the graduate attributes and, of course, GA4 around respectful understanding of Indigenous peoples' values, culture, and knowledge, and that cultural component about creating culturally conscious leaders, and particularly by the end of the program, to give the students the ability to demonstrate an understanding and to go out into the world to be able to understand differences, but also similarities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous practices and knowledges. Next slide. So one of the early parts of dealing with all this was actually to look at that graduate attribute and pull it apart into its key components so that we understood exactly what it was we were doing with the curriculum. And so, in particular, that deep understanding of Indigenous peoples' values, cultures, and knowledge fell to this course. And so I want to take you through a little bit of the thinking about how we landed there. Next slide, please. So in the course description, we talk about executive mindset. So MBAs as a cohort tend to be either business leaders now or executives getting ready to lead businesses. So they are the future corporate leaders of Australia. And so what we wanted to do was to give them an understanding of exactly what leadership is and a broader understanding of that so that they'd be equipped to deal with not just the practical parts of business around accounting and finance and everything else we do in the MBA, but a deep ethical and social, cultural dimension of the impact that businesses and leaders have in the world, and often negative impacts, and perhaps to get them to think about those things. So the learning objectives have that in mind. What is an executive mindset? How can they address those challenges? How can they consider the environment, social governance practices as responsible leaders? As well as responding to ethical dilemmas. So the assessment criteria in the course deals with that directly. And then also, how do they establish a workplace culture that embraces that diversity, particularly incorporating recognition of Indigenous knowledges? Next slide. So why indigenize the curriculum? Well, I think we've got a privilege in the business school, particularly with the MBA program. We've got one of the top 3 programs in the country. We have been for the last 20 years. But it represents an opportunity, an amazing opportunity to educate Australia's leaders and have them be the ones going forth and being able to talk to others about Indigenous ways of being, doing, and knowing, and equipping them to better understand the past to make more informed decisions about the future. So the purpose, one of the things I say to the students is that vast number of them are non-Indigenous. They also have little or no understanding of Indigenous ontology, that is, what is truth, and epistemology of, how do we get to the truth? But they don't actually have an understanding of Western ideas of ontology or epistemology. They're raised in them, but don't understand where they come from. So part of the course is actually getting them to a point of informed curiosity, equipping them to ask future respectful questions and engage in reconciliation in an informed way. Next slide, please. So what do we indigenize? Next slide. Yep, thank you. So it sits at the centre. We did this. It was interesting, Tracy's comments about add-ons. We decided very early on that Indigenous knowledge, particularly Indigenous ontology, should sit at the centre of the course because the principles of resonant leadership are around relationality, respect for each other, respect for the environment, responsibility for that, consideration of all stakeholders without boundaries, not just the owners. So an Indigenous ontology made sense. It made natural sense. The other thing is the assessment. So there's a specific unit that we spend 3 hours going through, going right back to the origins, or human origins, if you like, of ontology, and the fact that it's not neutral and it's developed and spread out in different ways. But the major assessment for the course requires that the students apply an Indigenous ontology and Western ontology, to a successful Indigenous-led Closing the Gap initiative, with that success being defined by the Indigenous community themselves. And that's delivered in a 20-minute in-class presentation. And that's co-assessed by the students as well as the lecturers. So there's a deep level of involvement by the students. Next slide. So in terms of knowledges, those knowledges are shared through video resources supplied by Indigenous organisations, as well as literature by Indigenous authors. So when we introduce the unit, we explicitly note that those Indigenous knowledges are quoted directly. So we don't interpret, we just use direct quotes from Indigenous voices, and the scholarship in the course is used exclusively. So there's no interpretation, it's all Indigenous voice. But we also acknowledge that because of the limited nature of what we can do in the course, that some Indigenous voices have been privileged over others. And of course, there are over 250 Indigenous nations, each having their own language and names, customs, and country. So what has been good, we've run this 3 times. Non-Indigenous students are usually surprised and thankful for being given an appreciation of Indigenous ontology to which they had no idea. But in doing so, and certainly in terms of Indigenous knowledge and leadership, we deliberately frame Western leadership concepts as being in comparative deficit. And that is to say that Western understandings of leadership have led us to where we are as a planet, and we're not in a great place. And what's interesting is it's not me necessarily saying that they draw that conclusion by themselves by the time we get to the end of this unit. Next slide. How the change was designed. Yep. So it was introduced as a new course in January this year. Like I said, we've run it 3 times. I think probably the most important bit, certainly in my reflections, is that I didn't come to this cold, though I still had a deep sense of trepidation as a cisgendered white male. But I'd had 3 years before the course working with Indigenous women rangers in the Territory through the Strong Women for Healthy Country network. And I'd had to, as part of an ARC project with them, decolonize myself to the extent that that's even possible, but actually engaging those ideas and with myself, but also publishing with Indigenous colleagues in the space. So I was able to draw on that kind of 3-year background, as well as then working with our curriculum design team, the Indigenous curriculum design team. It was an iterative process, drawing on those knowledges from the last 3 years, but also testing those course materials with Indigenous colleagues, but also running some of those leadership ideas by the elders that I'm working with in the Territory. Next slide, please. Challenges, yep. So as I said, I mean, I understand the trepidation. There's an amazing quote by Younger Porter, an Indigenous scholar, and he said, "Making yourself an expert in another culture is not always appreciated by members of that culture. Understanding your own culture and the ways it intersects with others, particularly the power dynamics of it, is far more appreciated." And that's a perspective that I try to take in the course, is to talk about the differences in ontology, particularly the way in which power in a country like Australia is distributed and the inequities there, but also by being honest about the failures of Western ontology in dealing with the world's problems. So while, yes, there's some discomfort, that was navigated through sharing the content with the Indigenous curriculum team, but also other Indigenous scholars at UQ to make sure that I was on track. I think one of the things I'd observe is certainly in the business school and elsewhere, that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars have been really supportive of what we've done. And the Indigenous sources, both literary and audiovisual, were relatively easy to access and really high quality. And I note that the ABC have got a new website, which I'm delving into at the moment for further resources. But I think it'd be fair to say, and you get to read the students in the room on that first night when I talked about the assessment, which is a major piece of assessment, is the major piece of assessment on closing the gap, that they were terrified. You could see in their faces, that was going to be the major assessment. But can I say that by the end of the program, they are very thankful to actually be able to understand and participate in the debate. And I think the feedback we've gotten through the CCATs, as well as other feedback that we've sought from them, kind of backs that up. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in terms of learning and impact, I think for me, one of the greatest learnings is that as a leadership scholar, but also as a gender equality scholar in the DEI space, I think it was a breath of fresh air personally for me, but also for the students, in that I think we're in a world, particularly in the last year, where we can see that leadership's kind of hit a wall, both theoretically. So for a long time, it's been known that we really haven't been making much progress on an understanding of leadership and certainly the challenges facing humanity, but that an Indigenous ontology and its enactment of leadership actually offers a solution to those impasses. And so that's why it might seem kind of counterintuitive, but the gratitude of the students is actually showing them that there's another way. And that other way might be able to address some of the current problems that they are facing in their businesses, but the world's facing more broadly. So, that's why the curriculum was framed around a comparative analysis of the evolution of Western and Indigenous ontologies, actually showing the students the Western traditions, Indigenous traditions, and how they have either diverged or can converge on some of these ideas. Next slide, please. I'll ask Emma to deliver our reflections and future learnings.
Thanks, Terry. So a little bit about me. So I'm Emma Olsen. I'm a Wiradjuri woman, PhD student and associate lecturer in the business school. I was very fortunate to be asked by Terry to conduct the yarning sessions for this course. And I just want to pull on what Terry said, and even Dr. Abby before had said that part of, and Terry had really mentioned before, that the students were terrified in engaging in this piece. And part of making them comfortable and getting them to engage in this space was to run these yarning sessions. So on the slide, you'll see we really identified there was 3 key things that we needed to take into consideration, which is relationality, respectful research, and safety. And while we had considered these things going into this space, it's got to be fluid. It's something that we've got to continuously review and look at as we go along. And I just want to touch on each of them a little bit more. So relationality was really vital. I've written here that we recommend that Indigenous facilitators, scholars, anyone that's engaging in those spaces need to present to, let me backtrack. When I talk about yarning, I also want to preface that I did a social yarn. So there are many yarns, but I actually did a social yarn. So when we engaged in this, relationality was really important. So I went into the space once the course had already started, and we established very quickly that students were reluctant. They didn't want to engage. They didn't want to engage in the yarn because they had no relationship with me. So I would preface, and our reflections are that you have to have these kind of icebreakers at the very, very beginning. Part of those icebreakers we'll go to the next, respectful research. So they included asking students to engage in appropriate language and appropriate behaviour, because it's also really important. We don't know what students are in the room. There could be Indigenous students. They don't know necessarily if the lecturers or facilitators are Indigenous. And it's not our responsibility to say that. So we want the space to be safe for us or whoever's in there, as well as the students. And then, which segues to the next part, about safety and presenting to students. Sorry, I've lost my way. Don't assume who's in the room. I'm probably just finally, I just want to sort of consolidate those thoughts. So relationality is starting to connect, engage, ethical engagement is avoiding placing extra burden on communities. Sorry, that's something else that I probably should have said. With the assessments and closing the gap, students were very excited once we sort of got past creating relationships. They wanted to do as much as they could in those spaces, but it was really important to emphasise to them that they cannot go to community and or Indigenous organisations and start laying burdens on them, because it's not their responsibility. They needed to go to things that were actually available publicly. And we made it relational, where we said to the students, how would you feel if somebody was coming on your doorstep every single day to ask you something that you could look up yourself? It was really important for us that students understood that. And then if we go back to the relationality, it was also really important for students to relate to indigeneity in a way that they could take home and take out to spaces. So I think Dr. Abby before, and even Terry had mentioned as well, that when we talked to students and when we yarned with them, we wanted to give them something that they could relate to. So I spoke to them about kinship. I shared a personal story about that my niece lives with me, but my niece is my daughter, and that I'm her auntie, but I am her mother. And I had a really lovely conversation with another student who came from an Indian background and had no idea that the kinship relationships within India were very similar to the Indigenous Australia. And then we also talked about how, while I had a perspective as a Wiradjuri woman, I can't speak for all Aboriginal people, that we are diverse, that we come from many different cultures, and you can't clump us as one Aboriginal community, that we are many communities. Go back to summarising, which was the cultural safety. So language and behaviour matter. I just want to, sorry, Terry, I feel like I'm taking your time now. I wrote this little statement at the end of this because when I kept reflecting about this, and Terry asked me to, I had this final thought, which was Indigenising leadership education is a journey. These reflections help us walk that path respectfully and ensure our students leave with informed curiosity and with confidence to engage in reconciliation in meaningful ways. We want students to become curious, but we want them to learn more. We want them to continue to engage spaces like this. Back to you, Terry.
Thanks, Emma. That's amazing. One last slide. So my advice is, I think you need to start by gaining a deep understanding of Indigenous ontology, Indigenous ways of being, doing, knowing, and there's some amazing literature out there. We were very fortunate in Bronwyn Fredericks identifying 5 or 6 books for us to get started. That was several years ago, and I think anyone can do that, those knowledges are out there for you to look at. I think you need to confirm that understanding you gain through meaningful ongoing dialogue, constantly talking with Indigenous colleagues. Is this what I am reading? Is this the ontology? Is this what it actually means? And take the time to be inquisitive and ask informed questions. And then be prepared for an iterative developmental approach. We'll be playing with this course for years to come. We'll be learning, we'll be reintegrating, we'll be adding new resources, we'll be, trial and error, but we'll share those experiences with the curriculum team and help us to process those, but also what's more important and less important in terms of design and delivery. And I think integrate those learnings as soon as they come to hand. Don't wait for the next iteration. Talk to the students as it's playing out. And I think a key thing, and Emma's just said this, don't expect others to do the work for you. This information's out there. There's already a tremendous cultural load on our Indigenous staff, and I think if you're non-Indigenous, you should show respect and do as much as you can, but then obviously turn to those more knowledgeable to confirm what we've learned. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry and Emma. Is there any questions? We can probably have 1 or 2. Any questions? No? Okay. Thank you, Terry, for that. Now, last but not least, we have a panel. So I might just ask those panel members to come up to the front, if you don't mind, and just bear with us for a minute because we just have to do a few different things with mics. So we've got Dr. Ren Perkins, Dr. Kate Thompson, Dr. Cohen Hurd, Dr. Condi Canuto, Dr. Kate McClay, and Associate Professor Steve Salisbury. So please come to the front and We've only got 2 mics, so Steve, don't talk too much. Bill's on.
I've got your questions.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, are we missing something? No. Alrighty, can everyone hear us? Alrighty, so managed to rope in these 6 lovely people, whether they liked it or not, I think. So we might just start off. We've got 6 people. We've got a bit of time before we have our next bite to eat. So we'll just maybe have a nice introduction if we go in order, and maybe a quick, very brief statement of, possibly what brings you here today to talk about culturally capable. Just keeping in mind there's 6 of you, and we'll keep it brief. So we'll start with Steve. Thank you.
G'day everyone, I'm Steve Salisbury. So I'm not Indigenous, but I've spent a lot of time working with a range of different mob across the country, particularly a lot of work in the Kimberley on dinosaur tracks. I chair the Indigenising Curriculum Working Group in the Faculty of Science, and one of the things we've really been grappling with is cultural capability in science and how to integrate that into our teaching and learning. So that's what's brought me here.
Hello, I'm Cohen, Troy Puckana man, so family from Northeast Tassie. I think my calendar invite brought me here this morning. But yeah, no, I also work in science, School of the Environment, and done a bit of work with mob, just trying to get a bit more Indigenous related things into the curriculum. Just been, I don't know, an organic thing, but now it's something that we'll have formalised, which is great. But yeah.
Thanks, brother. My name's Ren Perkins, Quandamuka man. I'm the Senior Project Manager for the Faculty of Health, Medicine and Behavioural Sciences. And so my role is working on indigenising the curriculum across the 9 schools within the faculty. So just, and what brought me here was Louise, and just following orders. And, but I have to acknowledge, so we, in our faculty, we have the Indigenising Curriculum Advisory Committee. So my work is really supported by my wonderful colleagues, a lot who are here today. So Luli and Kate and Condi, Monique and Olivia, Ying I saw earlier, Noni. So so that's why I'm here today.
I'm Kate McClay. I'm a non-Indigenous woman and I'm in the School of Education. I was a teacher for a long time and then transitioned over to academia. And in part of my role there is alongside Dr. Danielle Armour, who's a wonderful Indigenous colleague. We co-chair the Indigenous Engagement Committee in the School of Education.
Hello everyone, I'm Kate Thompson. I'm a proud Gurang and Yagara woman. My background's in social work and I work within the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Social Work. What brings me here today? I think I'm very passionate about building or creating culturally capable students and making sure that we're creating workspaces that are culturally safe and responsive.
Thank you, Kate. My name is Condi Canuto. My mother is from an island up in the Torres Straits called Thursday Island, and my father is from another island up in the Torres Straits called Bardew Island. So when we talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait, I'm that Torres Strait part. Originally from Cairns up in far north Queensland. Currently working at the School of Public Health. I coordinate a course called INDH 1005, which is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health course. And what brought me here today, I think we're just all here passionate about our people and our culture and how we integrate these knowledges into this Western system is a bigger challenge in itself. But I'm excited by what we have done so far.
Condi, you can keep it. I'm going to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here, and I feel very lucky to know all of you and work with you as well. So we want to talk about what is a culturally capable student. What does that really mean? And what are the kind of deeper things that we're really wanting to cultivate in students? So Condi, I think you could start.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting question, and I think from my point of view, it's evolving. I think when it comes to creating this culturally capable student, I think there's a sort of journey that they will go along. For me, it's about exposing them, one, to our Indigenous voices, to our people, to our mob. I'm really like bringing our community into the classroom. So they hear Indigenous voices, they hear from our community, they're exposed to this ways of knowing, being and doing, not just necessarily, you know, from a great article, but actually from the people who are living it. But I also think it exposes them as well to the strengths within our community. And I think that's a real important thing. So much of our, I suppose, I'm going on a bit, Kate, so just tell me.
That's okay.
So much of Indigenous anything has been presented in a quite deficit manner, you know, and we hear it all the time. Epidemiology has done it for many, many years, even though that's my background. I think it exposes them to the strength of our community, and I think that's really the thing that I like to try and expose our students to, is that there's a lot of strength in our community. There's a lot of things that our community does and does well. And I think they're the sort of things that I think I like to expose our students to, because hopefully it sort of then provides this alternative narrative to what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are or is or being. Because so many times we see this sort of negative portrayal of our mob, and that all our mob live in the Northern Territory and are living out bush, you know, where a lot of our mob, they were all along the East Coast. Auntie Tracy, I love the East Coast. We love the river. We love the sea, you know. And so it's important to sort of bring these strengths into the classroom. So it exposes our students to the strengths. Therefore, it changes the narrative. And therefore, we then allow our students to become culturally aware of what our people are really like. But I'm also hoping it provides a level of capacity for them. I'll stop there because I'll keep talking.
Thanks, Condi. So I teach a similar course. It's titled Working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples, Families and Communities, and that's taught to nursing, midwifery and social work students, both undergraduate and graduate entry. And we teach very similar stuff to Condi. And I think the key theme for us is talking about cultural safety and how students have a responsibility to be aware of their values and beliefs and how that impacts their practice. To reflect, to be critically reflecting every day in their work and understanding how their values and beliefs will impact how they're working with people or may impact people. And I think for me, that's one of the core components of a culturally capable student, is being able to recognise their values, beliefs and cultures, and then understand how that impacts their practice or may impact their practice.
So most would probably be aware in education there are a range of imperatives, nationally accredited standards for teacher education, and we have a national curriculum which includes embedding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, perspectives and cultures. And so we in the School of Education, in our teacher education programs, we are mapped to those national standards. So we have very particular obligations in that regard. And part of that is about addressing, and Auntie Tracy's spoken today about just the poverty of knowledge in school, and that lack of knowledge, which has meant that people don't know what they don't know, that there aren't those opportunities to engage with these ways of seeing and being and doing in the world. But the other thread that I've noticed this morning as I've listened is this idea of learning as epistemology and ontology, and that's an entwined process. So we need to develop knowledge and understanding, but there's also a transformation of selfhood, ways of becoming new kinds of people. And I guess for me, when I think about cultural capability in the students I teach, who are future teachers mainly, I think about not just giving them knowledge and skills, but encouraging them towards an ethical orientation to the world, which is one of care and respect. So we can map to nationally accredited standards all we like, and we can have things in the curriculum, but teachers always mediate the curriculum. And so what we need to be doing is encouraging our students to become particular kinds of teachers, and to see their role as not just about knowledge, as important as that is, but that's entwined with an ethical orientation of care. I think Martha Nussbaum says, you know, human beings capable of love and imagination. So it's this, I guess, a holistic understanding of cultural capability as knowledge and skills, but also seeing and being in the world, who and how we are in the world, that's embracing of more than just a Western way of seeing.
Thank you, Kate. What's a culturally capable student? So all the things that my colleagues said. Just following on from what Condi said about students being on a journey, for me, culturally capable is there's no endpoint. So yeah, I agree, brother. It's an ongoing journey. So we're always learning in that space. And you know, for like Kate said, for education in the health and medicine areas, a lot of our programs, there's national accreditation. So whether it's nursing, psychology, medicine, dentistry, allied health, there's national accreditation. So that being culturally capable or providing culturally safe practices is a requirement of our students when they're going out into the field. But for me, I think personally, I want to see our students that they can demonstrate ethical reflexivity. They can go out and work with our communities in a culturally, like demonstrating cultural humility, and you know, building those respectful relationships wherever they're going. So, and really knowing who they are and where they've come from. But yeah, I think really importantly that the culturally capable student, it's an ongoing journey, and then really encouraging and reinforcing that.
Cheers. I don't really have a lot to add on top of what everyone's yarning, but I think coming from, yeah, no, serious, like it's pretty much it, I reckon. But coming from a science background, I have some, I don't know, like there's a bit of an issues with the culturally capable graduate in the sense that I kind of feel like a lot of our Bachelor of Science grads are already culturally capable. It's just it depends what culture you're talking about. And so we often enculturalise Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander things, and it implicitly sets up the dominant cultures as acultural or hidden or invisible. So you've got this cultural thing and then the non-cultural thing, which is the norm. So it's for me, it's part of a pragmatic step towards that normalisation that Tracy was talking about before, where it's, you know, we realise this is all cultural, but for me it is this step forward into bringing into the light those aspects of teaching and yeah, curriculum that were hidden or not prioritised. So that's my sort of thinking about it. That's probably all I'll leave it with there.
I was just reflecting on everyone else's introduction, And I thought I get to test my cultural capability out weekly, because in addition to chairing committees for Faculty of Science, I'm also a certain Professor Bunder's Uber driver. Try that every day. But seriously, one of the things we've really grappled with within science, building on what Cohen was talking about, is in addition to having and being able to teach students who have an appreciation of and awareness of Indigenous diversity and perspectives and knowledges, we want to have students who can understand how that intersects with their discipline, their sort of cultural basis, particularly for non-Indigenous students. And then really importantly, for us, you know, we're thinking cultural capability means taking that awareness and understanding and really being innovative with it. So we've sort of started to coin the term cultural innovation, where they're going out and they're using that cultural capability to explore spaces that utilise Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous perspectives along with Western ones, and find a new way forward to sort of an enriched space that allows them to sort of create change. And, you know, I know that's a bit of a pun to the uni, but if that lets them sort of start to really transform their science or their field in a way that goes beyond just awareness and understanding, I think that would be, to my mind, a really culturally capable student.
Thank you, Steve. Okay. Can you hear me? I'm getting orders from Tracy. I don't know if you've heard them all day, but thank you for that. Is there anything more you want to talk? No conversation piece. All right. I know some of you have somewhat answered all this already in that last question, but the next question we have for you is, what responsibilities do educators have in shaping and modelling cultural capability through their teaching practice? Kate, do you want to, Maclay?
I think we have huge responsibility in that space. So I guess I can't see there's any other answer to that. But I guess what I would put forward is maybe two things. The first is that our classrooms, one of the reasons that we carry that responsibility is that we have an incredibly unique opportunity in our classrooms, which are very rich contact sites for people to encounter other perspectives, other cultures, other ways of seeing and understanding the world. So with that kind of responsibility, that we have that opportunity, I think we're incredibly remiss if we don't take up that opportunity. And I guess the way I would theorise it is that that's actually meant to be uncomfortable. When we are in those sort of contact spaces and encountering unfamiliar ways of seeing the world or understanding the world, that's really uncomfortable, and it's meant to be. So if it's uncomfortable, you're doing it right, and that we need to sort of make our peace with that. And the incredible good fortune that we have here is that we do have, like, we're supported by university policy around how we conduct conversation, how we treat one another. This might be the last time that the people in our classrooms actually are able to engage in those kinds of conversations in really safe, scaffolded spaces. And we need to be leveraging that opportunity and leveraging those rich contact zones. And that doesn't mean we have to know everything either. That's another thread, I think, in all of our conversation today, that knowing consists of knowing and not knowing, and that openness and curiosity, it's okay to not know. But if we can stay in relationship, if we can sustain an attitude of curiosity and self-motivated learning and a preparedness to take respectful risk, then we have extraordinary opportunities to shape what's happening, not just in our classrooms, but then in the diverse fields that they step into, whatever that is. And we are derelict in our duty, I think, if we don't take that opportunity.
Thank you, Kate. Is anyone else wanting to comment to that?
I'll just add one thing if that's all right.
Yeah.
I love everything you've just said, Kate. Thank you. But to add something maybe from my perspective as a Garang and a Yagara woman, I have a deep cultural responsibility to do this work. But there is a significant amount of colonial load that we carry to do that work. So if we can work with our allies and our peers to work together to minimize my colonial load so I can do the work that I need to do. So for example, we love bringing in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander guest lecturers, but there is so much work involved in getting them into the system. That takes months, unfortunately. So I have a colleague who will, on my behalf, help me navigate that system so I don't have to do that. My role is just talking, building relationships with our guest lecturers, and my colleagues will help with that process in the background. So I don't have to do that. So if we can just think about that, think about the cultural responsibility that people carry and what loads you can take off them so they can do that work. That's how we can work together and I think build really culturally capable students.
Cohen?
Oh, cheers. Yeah, I agree with Kate, and I think, you know, I'm a black fella first, and I've got my responsibilities, and that, you know, takes priority even in work. But thinking about, you know, second, I'm an employee of a colonial institution. It's important to think about the responsibilities of the institution, not just the teacher. Thinking about, I guess, these places exist and continue to benefit off of stolen lands that they've acquired and off of knowledge that's been extracted from Aboriginal communities. So there's an element of redress and justice in the work that universities need to do in engaging with this stuff. And you know, whether we're at the top of the uni or not, we're the sort of I guess the people that make that at the ground level through the education. So part of it is also, I guess, the weird tension of representing institutions and the responsibilities of the institutions.
Thanks, Cohen. This can be a conversation piece, so feel free to jump in. Yeah.
Thanks, Cohen. Agree with everyone. Just following on something that Auntie Tracy said in her keynote, and thank you for the keynote, but about the School of Education going out and having a relationship with Cherbourg and going out and building that relationship. So I just wanted to, in terms of what's the responsibility for educators, it's to being not just accountable to the curriculum, but also to our communities. So I want to acknowledge the work that, in particular, the School of Psychology. We went out we were invited by the Mayor of Cherbourg, Mayor Bruce Simpson, and we went out. Yes, I saw Ying here earlier, but whoever else is here from psychology. So those relationships are really important. Olivia's here from the School of Human Movement and is meeting with the Mayor this week, but it was also present at the Mayor's Forum where we had a number of Indigenous mayors from across Queensland come and tell us what their communities need from our faculty. And Kate and Monique, who were at the Murray School a couple of weeks ago, interacting with community. So for me, they're the responsibilities of educators and just demonstrating for their students what it is to be culturally capable. So I want to acknowledge the work that my colleagues in the faculty are doing.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to that, Ren. I think, as educators, we have a responsibility as best we can to model cultural capability. For some people, that might be easier because you're already doing things in your research space or you're teaching into a course where it's already set up. But I feel like what's equally important, particularly from the student point of view, is to see teachers being comfortable stepping into an uncomfortable space and admitting that they don't really know what they're doing or they're feeling a little bit unsure about their field or how they've taught something in the past. not being seen as an authority, but being seen as brave and willing to sort of admit that they're not really sure how to go forward, but they want to bring this up as part of a journey that they're going through. I think that can make a really big impact on students, because otherwise there's only going to be a small handful of teachers who are doing it. And I think the vast majority are going to fall into that sort of space of not being sure where to go, but they have to be okay being there and sharing that with their students.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think humility in this space is our way forward.
And being brave and, being comfortable in the discomfort. Condi, you might like to answer as well.
Yeah, like what everyone else has said, so definitely agree there as well. Look, I think here at the university, we're doing some good stuff too. There is a lot of good work that is happening. The RAP, the Stretch RAP, we do have great leadership that is emerging throughout the university as well, and we do have a number of our Indigenous PhD students who are coming into the academic world. So there is this notion of mass that's coming into university when it comes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff, and that's a good thing. We talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, being and doing, but we also have this institution when it comes with their own ways knowing, being and doing as well. And trying to merge the two, you're always going to get this level of tension, because to some degree, it's going to change the balance of power that we have here. And so there's this, for me, there's this sort of bigger responsibility that I'd like to see our university sort of have when it comes to how we indigenize curriculum. Because we'll have, even on the ground floor, we do have a lot of those issues, like Kate talked about, just how do we pay our mob coming in? That is a hassle, because it's not an easy fix. If you want to get a community member in to do a guest lecture, they can be waiting 4, 5, 6 weeks before they even see anything. And what happens then? Distrust. And that's probably one of the biggest downfalls that we sort of can face in trying to indigenize curriculum. If we don't do it, I suppose, right, Tracy, is the word, that we can develop this distrust within it. But on the flip side of it, I think we are doing some great work at the university, and I think that's probably what excites me as well, that we are sort of moving ahead with this, and that there's a lot of good work that's being done and still to be done.
And in terms of, you mentioned that's a tension, Condi. What about the tension around trying to ensure cultural capability isn't just an add-on, that it really is deeply embedded with the graduate attributes?
Yeah, that's that bigger sort of overarching picture when it comes to what we do as a university. And a lot of the times, this notion of an add-on, historically, that's what was seen to be doing historically. People were sort of just seeing it as a bit of an add-on into their courses or curriculum. I think the great thing about it now, talking about it, we're starting to get this shift in what we're seeing and what people's mind shifts when it comes to indigenizing curriculum. It's not necessarily just an add-on, but it becomes an important part of the curriculum. Yes, there's got to be issues. Yes, there's going to be tension. Yes, there's going to be people who aren't sure what to do or what not to do. But I think that's all part of that process that we are, go through. But I think from my point of view, it's about how, the university now recognises this as an important component. 50, 60 years ago, you would never have heard of any of this in an institution like this in my parents' time. I thank those shoulders, only Trace and all, they're the shoulders that we are working on and building upon to actually see the change that is happening within our university.
I think just building on that and reflecting a little bit on some of what was said earlier, one of the sort of key design principles of Indigenising curriculum, and a certain Uber client of mine reminds me of this regularly, is reciprocity. So when we are going through the process of Indigenising curriculum, how do we do it in a way that gives something back to the communities that invariably we're looking to for all this assistance to transform things? And I think through modelling behaviours through teaching or through or however it's done, the university can really show that it's serious about moving forward in a way that is beneficial outside of the university as well to all the communities we depend on.
I think just on that question of the add-on, yeah, what Condi's saying is really true. It's something I try to reflect on a lot because I whinge a lot about the state of things. Then you do have to have some perspective about how far things have changed. But I think you can't get complacent either. You always have to stay critical and keep moving forward and make things better. But yeah, that part of that tension, I sort of focus around, the whole student experience as they come in through undergrad. And part of what we've been thinking a lot about around a strategy to indigenise the Faculty of Science is all the different choose your own adventures that students can go on, and just making sure that that exposure that they'll get to this idea of a culturally capable graduate isn't just this thing that they'll get in this one course. Unless it's, an absolute doozy of a course that's going to contextualise the rest of their entire program and they're going to leave like totally getting it. I just think it's a bit unlikely. You want to see it modelled throughout the rest of your program in an ideal world, because so much about what we learn speaking from science is implicit. We can sit here and say, that science is ontologically based in one kind of worldview that comes out of ancient Greece and all good. But then if the rest of their program, they just get implicitly modelled a way of thinking about science in that worldview, like there's needs to be moments of reflexivity embedded throughout that constantly bring that back up. So a big part for us has been really in, well, what is a culturally capable student? Well, it's facilitated by culturally capable teachers, because you can't just leave it down to a small group of people in one course. You've got to bring in academics or scientists who are uncomfortable to get them to start to engage with it. And they might not be great, but that's actually where you're going to get that modelled throughout the program. So students keep coming back to it, because it does raise attention for students. We've had it trying to talk into the honours cohort when we start to pull apart some of the problems that all their research projects are on stolen lands where a lot of their advisors haven't gotten any permissions to do the work on if it's not native title or something, and the students are kind of like, well, hang on, is there this entire ethical component of me working on someone's totems that isn't even captured in what we're doing? We haven't even thought about this. And so we're just kind of finding ways to gently massage that over and be like, yeah, it's something that we need to engage with. You need to bring it up with your advisors and have some uncomfortable yarns.
Yeah, agree with all of those. In our faculty, it's important to remind students and our coordinators and program directors that graduate attributes are more than just technical skills. They're also about, especially for our courses, are about relational accountability, working with people, building those relationships, the reciprocity. So embedding those things into what we're teaching, but also what we're assessing within the program, I think is essential. And is Louise still there? So Louise presented the Indigenising Curriculum Learning Guide. And I think while it doesn't have all the answers, it's a guide. It's a really great starting point, and it is a journey. So that there's some great information that's been grounded on a lot of the work that Auntie Tracy has done in the green paper and the white paper. So Steve, we've presented together and the School of Biomedicine, and so how that can actually happen in terms of embedding the cultural capabilities into graduate attributes. So there's some great work happening, and I agree, Cohen, that there are positives. So it's trying to stay, just working with each other and looking at the resources. And thank you, Auntie Tracy, for mentioning the great work that the library are doing in providing those wonderful resources. I saw Leslie earlier as well. So there are some great resources to help whatever faculty that we're in to do this. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've got one last question, then we might open it for a couple of questions from the audience. So looking forward, we're looking to the future now. What would it look like if students were really culturally capable? What would that look like from your perspective, Kate? Or Kate, you might like to start. If students were truly culturally capable.
Thank you. I'll go first. I think it goes back to my first point around students who are culturally safe and responsive. A culturally capable student would be someone who can identify their values and beliefs and where they come from. A lot of my values and beliefs come from my family and my wider family. And I recognize that, and then I take the time to reflect and understand, is this a value that I hold or that my family holds? And how does that impact how I think and practice? So I think for students to be able to understand that, to be able to reflect on their practice and be okay with making mistakes. Mistakes happen and we learn from those mistakes. So framing that in a way that students are okay to make mistakes. I'm working with many nursing, midwifery and social work students who are frontline every day with people. And I give lots of examples of my grandmother, who is very strong in her beliefs. And if you don't take the time to say hello to her, she's probably not going to engage with you. And many students make that mistake, and then they come back to class the next week and they say, I just realized why that person didn't talk to me, because I didn't take the time to say hello. I didn't take the time to introduce myself. I didn't take the time to just get to know the person in front of me before I did my job. So I think for students to be able to recognize that, to reflect and adapt their practice, as Ren mentioned, it's an ongoing journey, and for students to recognize that and be comfortable with that.
That's hard to top. I guess I think about it in terms of students having knowledge, enriched knowledge, not impoverished or lack of understanding and knowledge, including a capacity to know what they don't know and to appreciate that there's still more to learn in this ongoing process. The skills to be able to find out the answers to the things that they don't know and to engage respectfully with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, elders, knowledge holders, community. But most importantly, a desire to do those things, that third element that, in a world where we're all about measuring things and scrutinising things, there are some things that are very difficult to measure, and that's one of them. But it's no less important. All of those things are very much entwined. We need the knowledge to be able to begin to go on our journey and start to develop an ethical orientation, but equally, you have to have them together at the same time. And so that's, I guess, what I hope for. And perhaps in terms of that idea of it being an add-on, I guess I would ask, it's an add-on depending on how you conceive the role of education. If education is about a liberal concept of job-ready graduates or whatever, I mean, there's an element of it to that, of course, but it's surely about more than that, about supporting the people in our classrooms to be able to take up their places in the world in ethical ways, ethical towards other human beings, towards the more than human world, to understand that they have responsibilities in the world, and to be able to respond to those things in mature and ethical ways. Some of those things are measurable and some of them are not. And that's part of the tension perhaps of an institution where we're all about measuring and seeing, have we jumped this bar or that bar, but perhaps appreciating that there are certain things that are not easily measured, but which are no less important to what we're trying to accomplish as educators in every site and sector.
Kate, were you reading my notes? That's what I was going to say.
Sorry, I was.
Yeah, so I was going to say those things. But I think if every student, going to UQ or be in other universities, graduated as culturally capable, I think our institutions would be transformed. And actually, some of the things that Terence was talking about in his talk, about the Teaching Innovation Grant, just saying how, I won't swear, but how stuffed up our world is. And if we look to the governments that have probably caused that, that discourse, and I think if we actually had all our students who are culturally capable, would be able to redress some of those wrongs that are in the world today, and definitely our institutions that our graduates are going out into, and UQ itself would be transformed.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ren, and I think culturally capable students who can go out and affect that change. But I think importantly, and to what was been talked about earlier, is around making sure there is that power shift that's happening at the same time. Like it feels like it's not enough. If we all learn the Aboriginal ways of knowing, and then all of our non-Indigenous graduates can go out and change the world using Aboriginal ethics, but it should be a real Aboriginal leadership, and Indigenous intellectual sovereignty that's driving that. So shifting the balance of power. I think there's a lot of things you could think about what they look like from different disciplines, lots of different examples. One I'd like to see a bit more in science, on top of that sort of intellectual humility that we talking about, and acknowledgement of, I guess, pluralistic kind of ways of thinking about knowledge about knowledge, is just to sort of things around basic free, prior and informed consent and rights, before scientific works and projects get started. A lot of the time we get people who come to us for advice on how to engage on a big research project that they already got funding for, so they're not actually thinking about community priorities. The other thing, I think culturally capable students would probably give me really good CCATs. That'd be my kind of main point I'd make. But other than that,
You good? Okay, well, I really appreciate having this broad range of voices here today. We're really privileged, but we actually have time to open it up to the floor. So if you want to ask everyone a question, or you want to ask a specific person a question, we've got time. So is there any hands? Anyone? Come on. You're being quiet today. What about online? Oh, we've got one. You just need to hand that one around.
Sorry, I'm going to put everything that I heard together and ask a difficult question. Personally, I'm dealing with that, and I would take any advice from you. So we talked about being culturally capable means that be able to show our respect through behavior and language. Knowing the differences between the cultures and knowing how it's reflects in our practice. As a person who is trying to teach, how can I enable my students to do it in a way that they don't jeopardize the line between respect and discrimination? Because if I push too hard, they can easily fall into just treat it like an algorithm, which these days with AI is very common. They all copy paste everything, even in their behaviors. If I don't push too hard, they're going to just ignore it because they think it's not important. So it's a common struggle every day, how far we can push or guide them to reflect that in their behavior and language. Sorry, it was a little bit hard.
Oh, well, I think there's probably other wisdom up here, but one thing I would suggest is actually setting up a clear framework in the classroom, including even just using sentence stems or some kind of a conversational framework. So I was a secondary school teacher, and one thing I learned very quickly was that sometimes young people don't know. We put them into small groups and ask them to discuss something, but we assume that they know how to engage in a conversation in a respectful way. So there are frameworks out there that even using sentence stems and having those things available, I would have them on the table and ask them to actually choose from those options when they're asking their questions and engaging. And that can be adapted up into a tertiary setting quite easily. So just as a very practical pedagogical, actually teach them what it looks like to engage in a conversation where there are different points of view, points of agreement and disagreement. So there's lots of different frameworks, but Rosie Scholl has a really nice one called the question quadrant that she uses and actually used in primary schools, teaches children to start their sentences with specific ways. So I want to build on what so-and-so said, or I'd like to distinguish this from what that person said. It seems basic, but actually sometimes people are not very good at knowing. We can't assume they know actually how to engage in that conversation. So setting up those simple sort of pedagogical tools can be just one practical way, I think, that we can govern what's happening in the classroom.
I think a really important skill to try and teach is listening. I think probably if one thing you would want to get across to students with regard to engagement is that every community you engage with is going to have different histories and different peculiarities, and every individual as well. So there are certain tools they can have to sort of go into conversations, but they can't really navigate through a conversation without really listening and being adaptive to what they're being told. And I mean, that's a great thing for them to know that, an algorithm's never going to get them across, because they do need to start to think about what they're hearing and apply whatever they've sort of garnered through their cultural capability learning, take that and learn to sort of use it in conversations and in engagement and see where it takes them.
I'll just make one quick point. In the current context, AI is really bad at cultural capability. It's very authoritative, but just flat out incorrect. And I think we all know about that. But that can be good teaching tools. You can sort of create. I think you could design something pretty obvious for students to see how that's not going to help you in a real context. But that's all I'll say on that.
Something that we teach in our course, because we are working with some students who have no prior knowledge of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We have many international students who don't know the history of our country. And then we have some students who were born here and know the history from a more Western perspective. So they often come to our class. Some are ready to learn. They openly share they're excited to be here. They want to learn. They want to know. They want to relearn from a more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspective. But then we do have some students who are very openly not wanting to be there. They say, I'm only here because it's part of our accreditation, our curriculum. Like, we have to be here, so that's why I'm here. We have very honest conversations with students in our very first lecture, and we say, we understand we're all here, we all have different opinions, and that's okay, but we need to create a safe learning environment. We need to be able to share So we create group rules in our tutorials mostly, and we refer back to them. We talk about yarning circle protocols and how what we discuss in class stays in class. And if you do want to share something that someone shared, you have to ask for permission to do that. But then we also teach a bit of a framework, I guess, that we've kind of developed throughout the course around reflect, unlearn, relearn, and plan. Reflect on what you've learnt. What perspective was that taught from? Who is teaching it? Reflect, unlearn some of those decolonized perspectives and be open to unlearning. We're not saying unlearn everything you've ever learned because that's just silly. You have some really valuable information, but just consider where you learnt that from. And then try and relearn from a different lens, or consider that there are different ways of knowing and being and doing. And then we tell them, reflect, unlearn, relearn, plan. Plan forward. What do you need to do? What knowledge gaps do you need to fill? What do you need to reflect on? Like, yes, you're feeling uncomfortable in this space. That's good to recognize that. But what are you going to do with that uncomfortableness? What are you going to do moving forward? How can you fill in these knowledge gaps that you may have? And what supports do you need to do that? How can we help you as a teaching team to move you forward in your process, in your journeys? So that's some things that we do.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you all. I might just see if there's one more question. No, we might leave it there. I want to thank this group of people so much for forcibly being here. But we really appreciate it because it's, you know, your take and your voice today and your perspectives has been really important and important for the room to hear, important for the group online. We've got a huge amount online and a huge amount of people, for the people that are online, there's a huge room presence. So I just want to give a big round of applause to this group here. And this sort of leads us to the end of the session. I really hope it's been really informative. We've had some great presentations for Indigenising curriculum. We've had Professor Tracy Bunder's keynote. So we really thank you all for coming. I'm going to pass on to Don McGrath. Unfortunately, Greg Winslet's had to leave the room. So we just have some little piece of information to wrap this up today. Can I have that mic?
All right. Thank you, everyone. As Louise said, unfortunately, Greg has had to go, and I am the person responsible for the slides working or not. And because I'm here, the slides are not working. So, but it's an absolute pleasure to be the one who gets to say thank you for everyone who has talked today. It's been an extraordinary morning and a really great reminder of this community and the work that's been happening. So thank you all so much for your contributions. I also have to say a few things that I'm going to follow notes, which is not the way I normally do this. So thank you all for your attendance and your engagement. For me, this is the key part of Teaching and Learning Week. There are so many people I get to have incredible conversations with, get to meet, get to see. Sometimes this is the only time of the year I get to do it. So please take the time to do it. Draw on the knowledges, draw on what you've heard today. Talk to the incredible people who are here. There are more things happening throughout the week, so I encourage you that if you have some more time, if you haven't used up every spare moment you have to be here this morning, try and get along to some of the other events, some of the morning teas, the lunches, the celebrations, the sharing and the networking. There are some amazing things coming up in the program. We're also trying some new things this year. So someone around this room has the opportunity to get a door prize. I don't even know if they have the opportunity. They are getting a door prize. So we have put a little red sticker on the leg of someone's chair. So if that is you, have a look on your chair, little red dot sticker. If that's you, we have a
Maybe
prize.
look at your neighbours' chairs as well.
Yeah,
There's
that
a
might help
few.
them. This is our first time doing it. This may be something we improve in the future. No, any clues? I can tell you it is not a panelist. It is not an associate dean. We have someone down the back. Congratulations. Okay. So today's prize is This All Come Back Now. It's a work by First Nations speculative fiction, written, curated and edited designed by First Nations people and printed by the University of Queensland Press. Once you've finished reading it, I'd love to borrow it. I haven't had the opportunity yet, but congratulations. So then I think the most important thing I get to do, we have lunch coming up. It is back where morning tea was. Again, I encourage you to take the opportunity to share food together, but most importantly, connect. There is also a range of information about Italy. There is an Italy quiz, which will give you an opportunity to see what you know of the 10 years of Italy. Hopefully you'll have some fun. I believe all the answers are either on the posters or in the mind of James hiding down the back there. So I get to end now again with saying once more, thank you all for your contributions, and thank you particularly Professor Tracy Bunda, Louise, everyone else, and Caitlin. I'm going to get through all the names, but thank you all so much. Please come and enjoy lunch, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Didn't need to say it.